So I'm going to get us started because we have a lot of really awesome content today. You're here for the deep dive series, and this series is really meant to foster connections between general and special education. And so, sorry, I just realized I'm going to change my name here so you all know who I am in case you don't. And it says the Residency Lab. Oh, there we go. Okay. Okay, so today there's a couple of things I want to say before we get started. First is some of you were here and I said this already, but I'm going to say it one more time, which is that we're using a new format here, which is a webinar format for Zoom, which means that we can't see you as participants. And so we're going to ask that you engage with us and with the content through a couple different ways. One is going to be a Padlet. So that's going to be like, we're going to have prompts for you. And instead of going into breakout rooms, we're going to ask you to respond on the Padlet so that everybody can see what everybody is responding. And the other way, well, actually, there's three ways. The second way is going to be in the chat. So you should all have access to the chat. So to test that out, I'm going to ask you to put your name and like what organization you are with in the chat so we can see who's here. And then the third way is going to be at the end of this session, we are going to have a panel of experts that are going to come and talk about their experience with a lot of the things that we're talking about today. And so there's going to be a Q&A function as well. So if you have questions for them, you can put them in the chat or you can use the Q&A function. And if you have questions at any time, feel free to message them in the chat, and we'll be able to see that. Okay, so today we're going to have kind of this cadence of connecting and sharing, which we're doing right now in the chat. Thank you all for introducing yourselves and telling your affiliation. This is really helpful because we can all see who's here. We're going to dive a little bit into data today. So I want to just make sure I say this up front, that this is going to be an information-heavy session. But the purpose of that is to set us all up for the next two sessions where you're going to be more interactive and like actually having resources come that you can use to apply in your actual programs. We're going to spend the time intentionally going through the data, then defining the best practices that are going to also frame the rest of the three sessions. We're going to talk about potential solutions. And then lastly, we're going to have a panel where we're going to get a chance to actually hear from people in the field who are doing this work. So I'm just going to ask you to be a little patient because today is data, but it's hopefully going to be some great stuff that you can take away. So to give you a little bit more framing here, today, this is the first session. Hopefully this text isn't too small, but we're going to examine the current landscape of educator preparation in California, in special education specifically. But we're going to talk about how special ed programs, residency programs, and general education residency programs, like where they intersect and where you might want to consider partnerships and collaboration between two different programs. In March, which I know feels like a really long time away, but that's going to be our next session. We're going to have a lot more like hands-on learning. So it's going to be led by Dr. Allegra Johnson. She's going to come in and give us some really great tools. She's going to help you identify program gaps and some frameworks to strengthen your inclusive practices in your programs. And then April is going to be our last session, and we're going to just dive even deeper into that for your own programs. So for this connector, I know it's a little bit different, and I'm telling you ahead of time that this was meant to be in a breakout room, but I think we'll be able to do it. So we're going to go into this Padlet, which I hope you can see. Can you all see the Padlet? Okay, great. So right here, you can see that this says activity 1. And what we're going to do is build a collective resume of who's in the room. So there's 4 questions here about your expertise, your lived experience, your aspirations, and your superpowers. And I would love if you could go in and just add either a comment here, or you can add, you can click over here and add a new sticky note to answer those questions. And then in our next session, we'll come back and like show some cool visuals of like who was in the room, what you guys bring to the table, and just, you know, make a collective resume of like this community of practice. So I'm going to go on mute for a second and give you a little bit of time to do that. I see a couple responses. Please feel free to keep adding responses, but because we have so much content to get through today, I'm going to get started on some of the nitty-gritty. Which first, it's really important to understand like why we're here. And so I want to set some context here. Um, we know, I think we all know, we're all in education, but there is a shortage of qualified teachers in our state, in the country, but especially in our state. We're going to be talking about California a lot and going into California specific data. Um, and the shortage of qualified teachers is one, why the residency model was established, because it's high quality teacher training. But also because the shortage of high quality teachers has really significant impacts on our students and our student performance. Um, and so when districts are using, we have to, but when you're using models like intern or just hiring long-term subs and things like that, it has an effect on our students. So the residency model is used to address that and hopefully keep people in the profession and prepare them in a better way. I also want to take a moment just to acknowledge that, like, I'm just going to be very transparent. I don't have any answers. None of us have answers, but there is this, like, very current disruption happening in special education in our country. So I want to call out that this landscape is just changing. It's changing really fast. So even in this past week, the government had layoffs that affected the Office of Special Education and Rehabilitative Services, which affected 500 people that were working in that office in the federal government. But then yesterday, a federal judge reversed those layoffs. So like this stuff is happening right now and it's happening really fast. And so who knows, maybe this morning, like while we're talking, something else will change. We don't know, but it's really important. I just want to acknowledge it because it will affect, all of us at some point and the way that we address our special education programming. But I think like we want to know that we want you to know that there's still a lot of unknowns. We don't really have any predictions. It is unstable, but that's why we're here. We want to make sure we're giving you solutions to like work together so you can pivot more easily between gen ed, special ed programs, make sure everybody is prepared to serve all of your students. I also think it's really important for us to define inclusion and what we're talking about here. So we know that legislation that's happened in the past several years has pushed for more inclusion of special education students into general education classrooms. We also know that most teachers recognize inclusion as a right. So general education teachers, these are all from the literature, peer-reviewed literature. Teachers know, general education teachers specifically know that this is a right. Like all of our students should be in general education settings. But at the same time, they don't feel like they're fully prepared to serve those students. They don't know what inclusion is. They don't know how to differentiate effectively. They feel overwhelmed with the number of students in their classrooms that have high needs. Um, and so that's worth noting because again, the residency model is effective at addressing that. Um, and as recently as 2023, there was an article that came out that published a definition of inclusion that conceptualized it as like an intersubjective experience. And what that means is that when we think of inclusion, we shouldn't just be thinking of that special education student. We should be thinking about everyone around them, the general education students, the classroom culture, the teachers, the gen ed teachers, the special ed teachers, the specialist teachers. Inclusion isn't just the experience of the student with special needs. It's the experience of everyone around them. And so when we create inclusive environments, we have an opportunity to have all of these students and community have positive outcomes. So that's really like the purpose of why we're here today. We're here to make sure that everybody knows how to be inclusive in an educational setting. And we also know, my last point here is that effective inclusion requires really strong teacher training. And again, that's where the residency model comes in. So I said this once, I'm going to say it again in case anybody joined, but I'm going to ask that you stick with us today because we're going to dig into some data. It's really important data, but I know it can be overwhelming. People don't love data, but I want you to know like why we're having this conversation and to give you the purpose around all the activities we're going to do for the rest of the series. Um, I have, actually, I should put this in the chat. There's this resource that has a link to our slides. Um, and also at the bottom of the page, here, I'll just share my screen for a second. At the bottom of the page, you can see resources, all of the references that we use to pull all of the data that we're presenting to you today. So if you want to dig deeper, you have access to do that. So that's on this resource page that everybody should have access to. Okay, so here's our first data. These are our students in California. You can see that California has a pretty diverse population. 56% of our students in California that are, or sorry, I should say not right now, but this is data from 2024, 2025. 56% of our students are Hispanic or Latino. So think about that for a second. Oh, the agenda that was just shown, I put that in the, oh, I didn't put it in the chat the right way. I'm sorry. Let me do that real quick. Okay, sorry. Hang with me for a second. There we go. I think everyone should have access now. You can also access the slides there. I know that there's a lot of numbers, so some people like to have it on their screen. They can zoom in, so it's all there as well. So as I was saying, 56% of our students in California in 2024, 2025 are Hispanic or Latino. 20% are white, and then 4%, or sorry, 4.9%, 10%, you can look at the data here, but this is the breakdown of the population of students in California. And then this is the population of students that are served under IDEA Part B, which means they receive special education services in the K-12 system. These are students that are referred for special education, whether they have severe needs or mild needs. But one thing I'm going to point out, I think in the next slide here. Okay, I'm going to go back for a second. I just want to point out a couple of things. 13.1% of our overall student population are referred for special education services. So that's our benchmark here. That's the average. But if you look at African American students, they're referred at much higher rates, 17.9%. American Indian students, 18.6% of those students are referred for special education services. 13.9% of our Hispanic or Latino students are referred for special education. 10%, so that's below the average of Pacific Islander students are referred. 13.1% of white students, which is right at the average, are referred. And then 16.9% of two or more races are referred for special education services. And I want to make sure also that you all understand that these are two different data points. So when we look at our student population, it's from the 24-25 school year. But when we look at the special education, it's from 2022-2023. And that is because the data that goes to the Office of Special Education, it requires all the states to report their data, and there's a lag in that. So this is the most recent data that we have. And so we are going to be comparing different populations in terms of years, but they don't vary so significantly that I thought it was important to pull data from 2022-23. But I do want to make sure that everybody knows that that is the difference between these data points. And so here you can see it all together. So you can see, actually, I'm going to go to this slide. You can see the number of the students that are identified as certain ethnicities, the school age population. This is the overall population. And then you can see the number of students that are served under IDEA Part B, which means they receive special education services. And our students, you can see like 4.9% of the African American population are students that, sorry, 4.9% of our overall population of school age students are African American, but 17.9 of those students are referred for special education services. So like these ones that are highlighted, these students of color are referred at much higher rates. Um, and I'm going to pass it to Tina, who's going to tell us a little bit more about why that's happening.
Thank you, Kate. So I don't know that I know that why it's happening, but I can tell you how it's captured. And of course, we can't talk about special ed without talking about disproportionality, right? So when we think about disproportionality, the whole idea and intention behind it is to look at the data to determine um, whether or not a particular group is being overrepresented. And so when we're looking at disproportionality, there are a couple of things that we need to keep in mind. On one side, we are looking to see if there is a specific race or ethnicity. That's part one to qualify as disproportionality, and or that are then overrepresented in one or more of the four areas. And so the four areas would be, right, a specific race or ethnicity being over-identified in a disability of any kind, a specific race or ethnicity being specifically identified for a specific disability category, a specific race or ethnicity being overrepresented in discipline matters in special ed, or a specific race and ethnicity being overrepresented in a particular placement. So let's walk through some examples of what that looks like, right? So if it is a specific race or ethnicity, and in my work with CDE in the special ed division in compliance, but we're not wearing our compliance hat today, I'm just using this as examples for disproportionality, is that oftentimes we would see a specific race, the Caucasian or in as federally identified white in an ED setting, right? And oftentimes we would see an overrepresentation of that level of student. And so I'm putting that into context to give disproportionality because we all hear the word to give it shape, right? And so another example would be a specific race or ethnicity who, so let's take that example that I had, a white student over-identified for emotional disturbance, and then their placement or their setting would have overrepresentation as well in a either SDC classroom or non-public school setting, right? So which it went on, and when we think about placement, we have inclusion with support over here, and then non-public school setting is at the all total end of the spectrum. And so disproportionality looks at whether or not there's an overrepresentation, starting with race, and then in one of those four areas. And so how does this connect? And then significant disproportionality would be that is happening for 3 or more years in the data. And so it's important for us to share that in this space because you're saying, okay, well, how does and we call it dispro for short. And so if I say dispro, I'm talking about disproportionality. But how does disproportionality connect to residency? You might ask. I'm going to ask you to make those connections, but I'm also going to offer up that perhaps if we are aligning ourselves to what the theme of residency is, right? Which is to prepare teachers over a 1 to 2 year period before entering the profession with a mentor. So if we are aligning them with how to identify students, how to offer up testing, how to unpack their biases before we enter into the classroom, then disproportionality may or may be eliminated. could be eliminated. And so the thinking around special ed and dispro, we want to give you the lens of what disproportionality is. So let's continue to unpack the some of the data. So under the federal IDEA, which is the federal requirements, um, a local an LEA is identified as significantly disproportionate, and then the LEA has to reserve 15% of its special ed funding to address significant disproportionality. So we've talked about dispro, and then significant dispro, it begins to impact because the government says under IDEA, you have to now spend 15% of your special ed funds to address it. And addressing it can be offering additional services to the students who have been where it's significantly disproportionate, offering more training to teachers, offering support to the communities and family engagement around the disabilities and the significant disproportionate pieces to it. So I want us to hold the lens. We're just sharing the definition, giving you context around Dispro. And let's take a moment to look at the data regarding the teaching workforce, because we talked about how does significant Dispro attach itself to residency or apply to residency. So the teaching force, if we look at our data, doesn't necessarily mirror the diversity of the student population. There is representation gaps that are persistent across race, ethnicity, and credential type. So when students don't see themselves reflected in their teachers, outcomes suffer, and then there are oftentimes referrals to special education, and those increase. So this is why we believe that residency can really impact disproportionality, right? And residency is trying to address this imbalance in the classroom. So currently in California, 23% of the student population is white, or not white non-Hispanic, while 63% of the teaching population is white, right? So the student population is only 23%, 63% is the teaching population. The largest percent of students of color, that the largest percent would be Latino at 54%, while 20% of students share that demographic. So we have students, I'm sorry, 20% of teachers share that demographic. So in addition, 73% of the teacher workforce in California is female. And so we're throwing numbers and data at you, and I want you to think about your context and start dropping faces into the data, right? That we are sharing. Start thinking about your context, where you're placed, and start adding faces, names, and people to that so it makes the data real. So when teachers enter the workforce through unconventional means, such as internships or with emergency credentials requiring very little training, they often are not prepared to function in an inclusion classroom. And then this is a huge equity problem because the teachers tend to be white, they may not be trained, and they may not be trained in culturally responsive methods or instructions, which in then turn leads to potentially overrepresentation in special education of students of color. And so why does this matter? We might ask. And I can give a we have a lot, but I was just thinking about my first experience as a general ed inclusion teacher, and they said, here, go for it. And I had no training. And so it would have been nice to have had a mentor teacher who could walk alongside of me at that time to say, hey, maybe the student is acting out because of these reasons over here and not because, they're emotionally disturbed and need to be identified as special ed. So why does this matter? The reality underscores why inclusion, collaborative teaching preparation matters, and why we must design programs that bridge general ed and special ed from day one. So we're going to take a moment for you to take a look at your personal LEA data. Remember, I said I wanted you to really add names and faces to the data. So we're going to give you a few minutes to unpack the data. And Kate, is this a good time? It looks like we want us to do a
Brooke is going to put the link to a resource in the chat, which I'm going to open here just so you can see. And we're going to give you like 5 minutes just to look at it. on this is the CDE website. You can look and see if you can find your LEA. Not everybody's going to be here. Your LEA or your SELPA, and you can see the areas of significant disproportionality so that you can start to begin to understand the context that you are working in. And we're going to just give you a minute to explore that and look at that. And then we'll come back and keep going. So sorry, I said 1 minute, but I meant 5 minutes. So also if you need to stand up and like, take a break or something, we'll come back at 10:35.
Okay, welcome back from that pause break and the quick data glimpse. Great. I'd love for you to take about 30 seconds to drop into the chat any things that you have seen, any information on data that you looked at that was significant to you. It looks like we have a few that said that commented, Robin, thank you. And then there were also questions about what if your LAA isn't on this list? That would mean that your LAA is not in significant disproportionality. It is a good idea, in my opinion, to take a look at your county. So the LEAs are also listed just in your county for you to get an understanding of what's happening in the school districts within your county. So the classification of a separate school could be a non-public school setting. So it is still considered a public school, but it is a placement. And with that, we just gave you a little taste. We wanted to give you the definition and the lens of disproportionality and significant dispro. And now we are going to move forward because you're going to put that in your pocket. You're going to carry that with you through the rest of our series. And I believe, Brooke, you are next. Kate,
That,
you are back.
yeah, it's me. Thanks, Tina. Um, excuse me. Okay, so now we're gonna just take a minute to start a little bit of reflection about your specific setting, whether you're in a special ed or a gen ed residency program. We would love to hear what is your working definition of inclusion. So like, what do you think that means in your setting? What maybe are examples? How does it show up? And just think about like who's at the table, which voices shape the decisions that you make in your program design, but also, in sort of your program's response to what's happening with your residents or with your mentors or with their students. So just thinking about what is inclusion in your program? What does it look like? And then if you're at the IHE, like how do your general and special education faculty collaborate? Do they collaborate? Do they not collaborate? What does it look like? And you're going to go back to the Padlet, and this is activity 2. So if I'm going to give you a couple minutes to just share your experience. And I'm going to just say too that if you would prefer to not use the Padlet and you want to put your answers in the chat, that is perfectly fine too. We can then put them into the Padlet later. Whatever's the easiest for you. But I'll go back to the slides so you can see the questions. And I'm just going to give you a couple minutes to do that because we have a lot to get through in the next couple. I know we have a lot of time left, it feels like, but there's a lot to cover. I'm going to ask that you keep adding your responses, but because we have so much to get through, I want to move us forward. Um, I think the reason I wanted to have you all kind of reflect on what your understanding of inclusion is because it's really important to realize that like we all have a different understanding of what that is. So it's really important to have conversations in your programs with your residents, with your mentors, with your admin, everyone that's involved to make sure that you all have the same understanding of one, what it is, but two, like how you're going to support the development of inclusive practices in your future teachers. So just come back to that definition often, like, or your understanding, I should say. It could be a definition, it could be like a conceptual understanding of inclusion, and make sure you're centering that in the conversations that you're having. For the purposes of our deep dive, we would also like to define inclusion. Oh, my slide's not going. which I'm going to call back to that, what I said before in the introduction, which is that inclusion is an intersubjective experience, meaning everybody experiences it. It's not just for your students with special education. It doesn't mean that a special education student sits in the back of a general education classroom with a special education teacher or a paraprofessional. It means that you're intentionally designing learning experiences for all of your students. And for the context of this conversation, I want to make sure we're also talking about that in the same way for our general education and special education teacher candidates, because it's the same thing. If you can model it in your residency program in collaboration between your gen ed and your special ed residency program, they're going to have a really strong example of how to do that in the classroom when they enter the classroom. So for our context here, we're talking about inclusion, meaning that all students and teachers get the chance to learn together, that are designed for diversity from the start. Brooke's going to talk a little bit about UDL and how we can center that in our programs as well. We want to make sure that everyone has equitable access and a sense of belonging in the space. There's a lot of research that says teachers of color, who, by the way, are the populations we're trying to recruit to the teaching profession for all the reasons we just talked about with the data, they don't have the same sense of belonging as all of the other teachers. And so you need to make sure you're designing learning experiences that address those needs. There should be opportunities for collaborative teaching for both residents, for mentors, for faculty. There should be opportunities for that co-teaching experience. And lastly, it's like, I think that's why we're here today, is the proactive design piece. It's making sure that when you're designing your residency programs, you're thinking of all these opportunities from the beginning. And I'm not saying like before your program starts. So if you have a program that's been going for 10 years, you still have the chance to like think about the intentional design of your program and centering inclusion, for special education teachers, for general education teachers, for teachers of color, for everyone. Make sure that you are considering all the voices, especially those diverse voices that you're trying to recruit from. And now I'm going to pass it to Brooke.
Thank you, Kate. So I'm Brooke Barrios. I'm the Central Regional Hub Lead for the Statewide Residency Technical Assistance Center housed here in Tulare County Office of Education. And part of my role, the biggest part of my role, is supporting residency programs within the Central Region. And with that, I have a lot of SPED programs that I work with. And some of the feedback and some of the conversations that I get, a lot of qual data around these SPED programs that leverage a co-teaching planning model with gen ed and SPED. Often these like ad hoc findings of tier 1 supports, like the increase in these tier 1 supports and the positive interactions they're having with students and between special ed and general ed teachers, and the decrease in referrals. And so I know that we're seeing across the country this real shift towards blurring the lines between general and special education. And, not just for compliance, but because students benefit when every teacher really sees themselves as a responsibility for every learner. And that responsibility is built right into IDEA and ESEA. And when we take it seriously, it really does change how we design those tiered instructions. And gen ed teachers play a real pivotal role in that prevention, using positive behavioral supports and differentiation and evidence-based practices before a student's ever even referred for evaluation. And at the same time, special education teachers bring this deep expertise in accessibility and data-driven intervention and instruction, and really understanding the variabilities in the learners. But when those two perspectives come together through co-planning and co-teaching, it's powerful. It becomes more responsive and more inclusive. So Kate had mentioned, some of the frameworks like MTSS and UDL and PBIS that make collaboration visible. They give us the structure for designing lessons that meet the needs for all students, reducing referrals, building those strong tier 1 systems. But it's not just about like the teachers, the instructional strategies. It's really that system level support that really matters as well. And districts and schools have to build the time for teachers to plan together, to provide coaching on inclusive practices, and to use data to track progress. And residency programs are great. If it's designed to do this and really embedded into the system, residency programs are a great model for this. So when it's built into the system, we see the real impact. Oftentimes we see fewer behavioral referrals, more students that can access grade level content, and higher retention among teachers that really feel supported. So I know, just for the sake of time, if you would like in the chat, like, what is collaboration? I'd love to hear, like, what does collaboration look like within your context? And then we can, as you're thinking about it, what does that look like in your context? If you feel like putting it in the chat, we'd love to hear. And then we'll go on to the next slide, where we really look at the UDL providing the framework for that inclusive design. So, oh, and I'll put the link, we'll put the links in the chat for you as well. So let me do that, because I can multitask like the best of them.
I got it, Brooke.
Okay.
I get it.
So UDL provides that framework for that inclusive design, like I was saying. And then, when you're incorporating multiple means of engagement and representation and expression, really those lessons get to that meet like this broad range of needs within instruction. And when gen ed teachers co-plan lessons, they design instruction that anticipates that, wider range of learners from the start. And then when we have residency programs, which you're going to hear from one this in a few minutes here, that really does incorporate the UDL into their coursework and their preparation. And so when it's intentionally embedded into that co-teaching practice, they really prepare the candidates to design these inclusive instruction, and not just this like after the fact accommodation. So really the chart, when we can prepare both pre-service and in-service teachers to collaborate through a lens such as UDL, the more sustainable and effective our inclusive systems can become. Okay, let's move. We love a Padlet. I love the Padlet. I can't wait to dive into it and we'll bring some of the findings back to session 2. So we've talked a lot about how collaboration between both gen ed and special education teachers really strengthens instruction and supports all of the learners. But collaboration really depends on how we see our roles as educators. So if we see ourselves working in separate lanes, which oftentimes feels very siloed, I'm sure we've all experienced that real siloed effect. And then, when we see us as separate, right, we really limit what that looks like. But when we can start co-designing the learning together, we're starting to develop those really inclusive classrooms. So back to the Padlet. I think this is our last Padlet. Okay. So what we'd like to do is explore this idea on the Padlet of like, what your thoughts, like, what does a special education teacher do? What does a general education teacher do? And where may those roles overlap? And so we'll take a few minutes, like, let's take about 5 minutes. Is that good? 3 to 5, 3? I'm bad with that. 3 minutes, folks, 3 minutes to share your thoughts. And then I'm looking forward to seeing what we come back with some common themes. So you all have access to the Padlet after this. So I know as we are moving through the rest of the webinar, if you have some thoughts, please add it to the Padlet. And then we'll come back in session 2. We're going to dive into this. And I'm really excited to see where this overlap exists. And if we see any, start to identify some of the barriers of what this could look like, or what are some of the barriers that you are also facing with this. So I'll pass it back to Kate.
Thanks, Brooke. Okay, so we did the same thing before we came together, and we used the definitions from the Department of Labor. Is that right, Brooke? The Department of Labor? I don't know. We used the definitions that were like at the federal level. So kind of like the most broad definition of a general education teacher, and then the most broad definition of a special education teacher. And so like basically, I think we all know general education teachers, they are the ones that are really meant to be the content experts. They teach those core subjects. They foster social and emotional growth. They assess and support learning of like large populations of students. They collaborate with families and colleagues, plan, manage, supervise, integrate hands-on learning and technology, and they do progress reporting. And our special education teachers are supposed to be the experts in pedagogy and like accessibility. So those are the people that adapt and individualize the instruction when there's needs, assess and monitor progress. They collaborate with a lot of others. So they're not just responsible for like one classroom typically, they're responsible for maybe a whole grade level or a whole content area. They teach in multiple settings. They support transitions and life skills. And I think gen ed, they do that, but I think it's really intentional in the special education setting. They use technology and assistive tools, and they are the ones responsible for IEP writing, reporting, monitoring, holding those types of meetings, all sorts of, compliance. Like, I don't want to go to compliance, but they have to do all the compliance stuff as well as the instructional stuff. And we can see here, like we kind of mapped it, like what are the overlaps? So the overlaps between like the core purpose of the role is that they both support students' academic, social, and emotional needs through instruction and relationship-based teaching. That's like the essential, I would say job description of a teacher. That's what they do. They both do that. They plan and deliver lessons in core subjects using hands-on interactive methods. Special education teachers do that too. I think sometimes that gets lost in translation. And they assess student skills, they track progress, and they adjust instruction accordingly. They both do this. It looks different in the settings, in like the special ed and general education settings. So you can look at that third column to see like really how that changes. But I really want to focus on the overlap. Like where do both roles have the same function? Sorry, I lost my mouse for a second. I want to talk also about collaboration. Both roles collaborate closely with families, with administrators. They might be different families and different administrators, but if you have a special education student, that student has a special education teacher and a general education teacher. They always do. That's a requirement. So like know that every time there's a special education student or a student that receives special education services, they also have a gen ed counterpart. So that gen ed counterpart should always be included. They both mentor students, build community, and promote positive behavior and social skills. That is also a role of both of them. A couple other areas, they use digital tools, especially in today's age where people are talking all the time now about AI in education. So like I'm sure gen ed and special ed teachers are both using those tools in their settings. And then they both help students progress academically and socially from one grade to the next. Again, that might look different in special education because their needs might be different, but they both have that essential role in a child's life. So for the next 10 or 15 minutes or so before our panel, I'm going to get into like the nitty gritty of like what I think you're all here for, which is how does a general education residency and a special education residency, how do they collaborate? And there's 5 areas I'm going to talk about, and I'm going to give you some concrete, like just big ideas that we're going to get into in the next two sessions. So the first is going to be in shared clinical practice design. The next is going to be integrated coursework and curriculum design, the co-development of the mentor system. I don't know why the word development there is twice, but it is because it's important. Assessment, reflection, and continuous improvement, and then pipeline and sustainability partnerships. If you know about the 10 characteristics of effective teacher residencies, these are aligned to those characteristics. And so I'm going to go into that into a little bit more detail here. So the first one is shared clinical practice design. What I've done here is come with a couple suggestions that are like hopefully concrete suggestions you might be able to integrate right now. And I've aligned them to both the characteristics, the key characteristics of effective teacher residencies and the CTC program standards. So the preconditions for preliminary credentials. Because what I wanted to make sure that we are aligning, obviously all of our credential programs have to meet those requirements to credential candidates in special education and in general education. And we want to make sure that our residency programs are rigorous, and we want to make sure there's opportunities for collaboration. So I compared all of these things and came up with a couple different suggestions that I hope you can take action on. So when we're thinking about clinical practice, like that's going to be what the job looks like, right? So that's going to be what those general education and special education teachers go and do after their credential program. So it is like of utmost importance that there are opportunities for collaboration in the design of the clinical practice. So the first suggestion is to consider joint placements in co-taught classrooms. There's a couple different ways that could look. It could be a general education and a special education mentor teacher that both have a resident. So now you have 4 teachers in the classroom. It could be a general education mentor with a general education resident and a co-teaching special education teacher that comes in. So there's only one resident in that situation. Anyway, you see where I'm going. There's lots of different ways you could do this, but you want to make sure that all of your residents have opportunities to be involved in a co-taught classroom between a credentialed general education teacher and a credentialed special education teacher. And those align to all of these characteristics. In reality, like I would argue that they really align to all 10 characteristics, but I called out these specific ones. In the same light, you want to make sure that you're giving opportunities for your mentors to share professional development opportunities, because you're then building relationships between general education and special education teachers, but you're also allowing them to develop their skills. Maybe their teacher preparation program was 15 years ago and they never had an opportunity to co-teach. They never had an opportunity to learn about special education or general education methods. And so, you know, your residents are getting like cutting edge credential coursework. You want to make sure your mentors get opportunities too, because those are the ones that are going to be practicing and like learning with your residents while they're in that clinical practice setting. This one I really want to prop up because one time I'm just going to do like a quick diversion here, which is one time I had a student doing a mock interview and they were like, I've never heard of an IEP. And this was someone who had like completed a credential program. They were doing a mock interview and it was a gen ed candidate. And I was like, what do you mean you've never heard of an IEP? And they never had any opportunity to discuss IEPs with their general education mentor teacher. They never got to go to an IEP meeting. They never got to view an IEP. And so therefore it was something they had heard in their credential program, but had no concrete experience with. And so I think it's really important to make sure that you are intentionally designing opportunities for both gen ed and special ed candidates to join. If they can't join a real IEP meeting, have a mock IEP meeting opportunity so that everybody understands the lingo. There's a lot of language there. And it's not the first time that they experience an IEP meeting when they're in, you know, a high stakes situation where there's a real IEP meeting with a real student with real goals and all of those things. And then I think also the last suggestion I have here is cross-residency reflection sessions. Like allow, and that could be reflection sessions, it could be feedback cycles. allow people to reflect together. Like what is your gen ed candidate experience? What is your special ed candidate experience? And compare those and see where they might overlap. Like, is everybody feeling like they're ready to teach special education students in an inclusive environment? And if not, like, where are the opportunities where you can build in some more supports for that opportunity? Okay, so the next one is integrated coursework and curriculum design, which I kind of just spoke about, but this is more about the like actual coursework, not the clinical practice. So just making sure that residents and mentors have an opportunity to share foundational learning, like understanding what inclusion is and how they might practice it, and then calling out those opportunities for practice consistently throughout the program. Sharing common pedagogical frameworks so that your residents all have the same language to talk about instruction and to talk about learning. Again, allowing co-teaching opportunities between EPPs. So that's not necessarily the mentors, but sometimes the special education department is in a completely different department than the general education department. I know that was the case at the institution that I was at previously. And so there was not opportunities from the gen ed and special ed like professors to collaborate and teach classes together. But the residency program design allows for that. Like that's why it exists. And so use that opportunity to allow those professors to work together and maybe co-teach their gen ed and special ed candidates like once a semester. You know, even if it's just once in a while, if you can't co-teach your whole class, there has to be an opportunity for that if you can allow for it. And then give opportunities for collaborative capstone or signature assignments. We all have those sorts of assignments. They all require us to think about students with IEPs, whether that's a special ed or a gen ed candidate. So why not have them collaborate on that so that they're getting to know the requirements of both programs, the content from both programs, but also, you know, practice that co-teaching, co-planning kind of aspect of instruction. I spoke about this a little bit earlier, and I know I'm getting close to time, so I'm just going to hit on this pretty briefly, but like developing your mentors collaboratively between gen ed and special ed is incredibly important and has more weight than it might seem at first, but just making sure that all of your mentors they're evaluated in the same way. They have training opportunities in the same way. And then allowing for supports for the mentors that go beyond induction as well, because a lot of times those residents, they're going to come back to the mentors that they trust. When they're having a hard time in the classroom, you want to make sure that those mentors and the residents understand what inclusion looks like beyond residency. Again, I kind of spoke about some of these already, but if you're looking at assessment and reflection and continuous improvement, if you're a program that's been in existence for a while, you want to give opportunities for shared formative assessment rubrics. Like all of your teachers are being evaluated about inclusion in the same way. Give opportunities for joint case studies, you know, talk about the collaboration. What does it look like in your specific school setting? In your residency, what might your residents and your mentors be able to understand and observe like in their actual setting, and then talk through those things, talk about the opportunities for collaboration, where there might be bumps in the road, and then how they might address those bumps. Having just an open communication about those things can have a significant impact. And then again, allowing for cross-program feedback loops. Um, Joint recruitment pipelines. This is about the pipeline and sustainability, like recruitment to residency. If you have gen ed and special ed candidates being recruited through the same pipeline, then they will be aware of all the opportunities and they might be able to choose the opportunity that best fits them. Some people don't think they want to become special education teachers, but would be amazing at it. But like there's something that they're just a little bit nervous about. But if they see that like there's gen ed and special ed, administrators, they're all recruiting together. It's an inclusive process. Everybody's being interviewed together, like whatever that looks like for your program. If they see that, they might be more comfortable saying, oh, I would love to be a special ed teacher, or I'm really excited about the culture here because everybody's included. If you are able to, consider offering dual credential pathways for the same reason I just said. Oftentimes it's just a couple more classes. So thinking about what that might look like in your residency program would benefit your candidates and your school communities. And then sharing funding and staffing models as well, just the same things I just said. Okay.
Panel time. Okay, I have our two panelists on. Let's see, let me grab my, hello. There's, okay. I'm really excited to hear from these two leaders that have built a really strong, impactful teacher residency partnership. It is between Clovis Unified School District and Fresno State. And they have a long history of running special education residency programs that also support, that focus on the diversity of the workforce. So please join me in welcoming Marshall Ham, Director of MTSS and Induction and Residency for Clovis Unified, and Dr. Kimberly Coy, Professor at Fresno State. And together they'll share how their collaboration with this residency model is preparing the high quality teachers to meet the needs of all of the students in the Central Valley. So thank you both for being here. I'm very excited. So I'll start off with first question. How does your program define inclusion in the context of teacher preparation?
Okay, well, I'll go ahead and start. How do we define inclusion? So first of all, I'm Marshall Ham. I'm director here in Clovis Unified, and happy to be on this panel. Thank you for having us. So I think we do as much as we can with our general education teachers and special education teachers to make sure that students are included in a variety of ways throughout the day, throughout the weeks of the school year. We have a variety of ways that they do that. It depends on students' IEPs and what they're able to do and what is best for them. So we do it in so many different ways, like we have teachers pushing into, we have special education teachers pushing into classrooms. We have students obviously being pulled out and working with RSP teachers or FLS teachers. We have students doing different things in the classroom and working with their peers with instructional assistants sometimes and sometimes not. Working with them, they're in sports, they're in a variety of different things. And so it looks like a lot of different things for a lot of different kids, but we want to make sure that every student feels like they are part of the school and a part of the classroom that they are really assigned to, the general education classroom that they're assigned to, as well as with their special education teacher in addition to that as well. So hopefully that gives you a little bit of an idea of what we're thinking, but Kimberly can probably add to that too.
And I was going to talk about inclusion from the teacher preparation side. Our residents have access to inclusion in a couple of different ways in their programming. So many of their content areas are taught by what would be classically called general education teachers. And the teachers we try to choose for teaching those courses have experience in some theoretical framework that helps with inclusion. What universal design for learning would be the first one that we tend to lean towards. So they're seeing general education instructors or faculty that purposefully teach to a wide range of talents and a wide range of students with different needs and disabilities without necessarily having a ton of expertise in the specific disabilities, but they do have a lot of expertise in teaching across all types of students in all types of ways. Because we all know that, if you met one student with a disability, you've met that one student, with autism or ADHD, for example. So learning how to teach math, science, literacy to a wide range of students is one way that we on the university side try to help these students get set up for success that way.
And as far as placing our students, our residency students, I check with mostly the special education teachers that they're going to be paired with and check with them on which general education teacher that they see as the best partner for them as well. So they work in tandem with that general education teacher so they can kind of see from that lens, that side of things, from the general education side, how that works in their classroom, and the collaboration between those two teachers, and how important that is for all the students.
You jumped into my next question, so I appreciate that. I wanted to ask what that collaboration looks like at that site level. And so so then let me ask a follow-up is how is that collaboration with the pairing or the co-teaching, co-planning influenced, has this really like had an influence on some of the general education teachers in their confidence, self-efficacy? You know, have you seen an increase in stronger tier 1 supports or differentiation in instruction?
Yeah, I would say for sure. You know, they're supposed to be the experts, and so I think it challenges them to make sure that they're hitting the right marks for each of their students, and making sure that they're the best teachers they can be, best examples for the residency students in the general education setting. So I think it's challenged them to kind of collaborate even more with the special education team and make sure that they understand what is going on in those classrooms and what types of adjustments they can make in their own classroom to make sure that all their students are hitting the mark that they need to.
Okay.
And I wanted to give an example of a different way you can think of inclusion and partnership that in particular, Marshall and I have come across, where some of our residents, our Fresno State students, have themselves a learning difference or a disability of some sort. And making sure that they're in the right mentor placement, which Clovis has such a wide variety of mentors that they can put students with, and we'll shift them around until they have the right setting. But that's a real example for everyone in the partnership, as well as everyone in the schools, general and special education, that learning spans our lifetime, and the learning that we're providing to our university students, to our residents, mirrors in many ways the learning that's provided to first grade and second grade students. And I think that I've worked in a lot of different residencies, and when I see something like that happen, and the care and concern for making sure that that student is very successful and very prepared to teach, even though might take a little more time, make a different, might have to take a different approach, certainly need the right mentor, is a huge example that crosses all of the people involved and all of the systems that are involved.
Thanks for adding that piece. I love having both of you on the panel so you get perspective of the LEA side and then the teacher preparation side. And with that, Kimberly, do you have within your coursework, you have classes that overlap between multiple subject and special education teachers as well, or residents?
Right. So I was just looking at our advising sheet again to kind of make sure I had this right. But for example, in one of the first phases that our residents take, they have 3 courses that are considered multiple subject courses, and then 3 courses that are considered special education courses. So, and then they have their general or their clinical experience too. So they have a lot of exposure to both what is classically special education and what is classically general education. And I think moving forward as a country, that we are beginning to stop siloing what is considered special education and what's general education, and think of it as education. And to do that in a systematic way and in a systems way, I think is can be really important without kind of pushing it in someone's face, like you have to teach all the students all the time, instead of we love teaching all the students all the time, and here are the tools that we know will help you do that.
Thank you. I was going to pull up your advising sheet too, but you got to it before me. So, um, so you've been running residency. This partnership has been longstanding. You guys are part of the earlier CTC residency grants. And so you've been doing this for quite some time now. What feedback have you received? And I'll ask both of you, one side of like mentors, administrators about this partnership, and then Kimberly, about like the residence experience and the alumni graduate experience, like after the residency completes?
As far as it goes for us, our residency students are the ones that are most sought after by our teachers and really administrators too. Um, Part of that obviously is the shortage of special education or teachers going into special education. So we need those teachers, and they want to make sure that they get a chance to watch them and watch them teach and watch them interact on their campus and those types of things. But also because the program's so good and they get really great instruction from Kimberly and Dr. Rios previous. So they're really prepared. They're really prepared for our district. So we also have um, our administrator over special education, Dr. Perry Carter, interview all of the residents before they're accepted into our program as well. So it's a good fit for us. It doesn't necessarily, we're interviewing them, but they're also kind of interviewing us. It may not be a good fit for them as well. So the students that are coming into the residency program in Clovis Unified understand kind of what how our district runs and how we work and operate. And so they're maybe more prepared than other student teachers that come in that maybe don't know our district as well. So it's part of that vetting process that helps us as well. And so our our teachers, like I said, are really asking, I would like to have a residency student, general education teachers, and then also special education teachers. They want to have those residents, they want to prepare them, they want to keep them for the second semester or whatever else. So we kind of have a pipeline going, and a lot of the same mentor teachers have a residency teacher. So that's a really good sign that they want to keep the program going, want to keep those that pipeline coming from Fresno State through the residency program.
And it's fun how you say it's a long-standing program. This happens to be my first year working in this particular program. I've worked in 3 other residencies prior. And the first time that Marshall and I have worked together in this capacity, which has been great. One thing that I think is important to understand is that every residency, every school district is different from each other. And they're not, one is better than another, but they tend to have different trajectories. So a couple of years ago in Clovis, their superintendent shifted, and the new superintendent is from a special education background. And I think that as leadership changes, focus changes, and I think that probably encourages the residency as it looks today. So from the top down, that really can shift how things are going. And we try to meet that. We try to be there for that shift. Certainly the school districts are the leaders in the direction that they want to go. They are the ones that know their parent, their students, their community, and we want to meet their need. Our job is to meet that need. So Clovis also does something else really well as far as collaboration is they recruit heavily from within their own district, including parents. I've been speaking to a parent this year whose child is in special education and they work as a paraeducator. And someone from Clovis reached out to that parent and said, we really think it'd be great if you were in this residency. Have you thought about being a teacher? And the first time I talked to this parent, they were so enthusiastic. They were in the parking lot. They couldn't get on the phone fast enough to want to talk about this. And that is not unusual for that school district, which really shows us like, okay, they want to grow from within and they want to grow not just from students they have graduating, but from people that they see are interested and are invested in their school. So we have to make sure that our program meets those needs and we are there to push that forward. And then another thing that I think is different collaborating at Fresno State is that when we give out a special education credential, we give out both the mild, moderate, and the extended support needs. We don't do just one or the other. All of our coursework is focused toward the spectrum of special education, which is not a linear line, and then their student teaching or their practicum is in both environments. And in Clovis, it's also in general education too. So the collaboration and we tried to focus on what is the teacher in each of those environments thinking about the rest of the system? How do general educators feel about special educators? And how do special educators feel about general educators, and then mild, moderate, extended support needs? So we're asking our students, our residents, to look at this from everybody's point of view and then develop their own learning path and their own trajectory as they, because you learn so much at the university level and then you learn everything else in the school district. And we've seen that time and time again in a lot of research. So it's important that we prepare them for lots of points of views and then encourage them to grab onto that themselves and figure out what they need to learn to go further that way.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And that, I know I said long-standing, Kimberly, you and I, we've known each other for a long time too. So I'm just like, yes, we're all part of this. But yes, I mean, you've been running residency as well for a long time, but just in different contexts. So with that, I mean, you've got this deeply embedded approach to the grow your own, the very like the Clovis grows their own from community. So it's very community centered, and you have high I want to talk about the retention rates, like the impact on like teacher retention and satisfaction, because a lot of folks that work in Clovis live in Clovis and stay in Clovis, like long standing commitment to that community. So can you tell me a little bit, have you noticed any impacts on the teacher retention or satisfaction through this program?
It's very high. I didn't really do all the statistics, but we've had the residency program. I've only been a part of it for 3 years, but it's been going on for 7 or 8 years here. Kind of the original teacher residency was here. And it's like 90% we've kept those that are in Clovis stay in Clovis, and the ones that are not, it's usually because of a move, like a spouse got a job somewhere else and either stayed in California, but in a different area, or moved out of state. So the ones that go through the program are pretty much staying here. A lot of them get hired that second semester that they're in the program. So, you know, they're seeing such positives, and a lot of our residents are instructional aides as well in the classroom that they're residents in. So they often sub in there when the teacher's gone, things like that. So they're kind of, I mean, it's kind of trial by fire. They're kind of getting in there and really, they kind of take ownership of that classroom as one of the teachers of the students. So, whichever classroom they're in, they get a couple of different experiences, but it's just a great opportunity and exposure to the administration at sites that can watch them in action and see how they interact with the rest of the school, because that's really important as well. I was principal for 11 years before I was in this job, and I had an FLS path. So I had preschool FLS all the way through 6th grade and a PALS class. So we had a lot of special education students and special education educators on our team, and they were coaches. They were involved in a lot of carnival planning, all kinds of things on our campus. So how does the teacher, the resident, fit in with the rest of the campus and the culture of the campus? That's also important, not just their teaching ability and their caring for kids, but do they want to do stuff outside of the classroom and be a part of the community, the school community, and things like that. So it's just a great opportunity, and I think that helps them feel more a part of the school and more a part of the district and part of the culture when they get more involved. And so many of the residents get involved as residents. They're not even, teaching yet on the campus, but they're a part of the campus, and they get out there and work with the kids in other capacities besides just the classroom. And I think that really helps them feel a part of the system and want to stay with us.
Kimberly, how about the satisfaction, the surveys that come back about the program?
They're high, but they're not always perfect. And we have one example I wanted to talk about just that's happening right now, is that all the Clovis residents have banded together and are not satisfied with one of their teachers from Fresno State, which happens. But what I appreciated was that they're acting as a team on this, that they're not complaining for the sake of it. They have specific reasons and are looking for help, and have written really respectful, deeply, concerning or showing their concerns deeply and in a structured way about this instructor, which I think is such a great thing. Um, they're they're just talking about it in the way that we hope that they would talk about something like that. And as we know, because we've all been educators for a while, you learn as much from an educator that is not great as you can from an educator that's great. And to constructively learn from an educational experience, it's not what you were hoping for, I think is really positive. So we're having meetings and we're supporting the instructor that's having a difficult time. It turns out they're just having a difficult time. Um, I think that really shows comfort and satisfaction and agency. And I think that that's what we want in all of our teachers, in particular special education teachers. We want them to be able to go ahead and advocate for themselves and advocate for their students and advocate for each other. I haven't seen that before, and I think that that's really great.
I love that. I'm glad you shared that. Um, Sometimes we don't talk about those things that happen in the programs, but I appreciate that. So for those that are, I mean, there's a lot that goes into just running a residency. And then you have all of these complex, nuanced pieces that go on behind the scenes. And so for those that, are new or thinking about maybe leveraging this, there's a new opportunity that's coming out from the CTC to write a new grant or to restructure what their current program looks like. And potentially folks are talking about adding on special education as a pathway that they haven't added before. And so there's these opportunities that are emerging for folks. And so what are some lessons or challenges that may have emerged that might help others that are thinking about um, maybe a different way of collaborating in this spaces, either at the LEA or within the IHE LEA partnership or beyond that?
I think I'll have Kimberly address this mostly because she's come into this and kind of looked at our program and has the experience from previous and kind of brought an idea forward to me right when we first started about reducing our semesters. And so I'll have her kind of address that. And then I have something else to talk about with that too, with the challenges.
Okay. I think the biggest challenge that we're seeing for all of our students now is the cost of becoming a teacher. Not only do you have to pay for, just the regular things you have to pay for when you go to college, tuition, books, but when you become a teacher in particular, you have to pay for time. So you have to pay for time to be in the classroom, to do your practicums, and to student teach. So one of the ways there's a lot of ways you can push in on that, and all around the rules that we have to that we're supposed to that we need to follow. So one of the things we're going to do in Clovis in particular is they have a 3 semester program currently. So it's fall, spring, and then the next fall, and then they're finished. So we're going to shift that to summer, fall, spring. So they're done within one academic year. And in the summer is when they will do a lot of coursework. And then in the fall, they'll do one of their placements plus a day in general education. So they have both of those experiences. And then in the spring, they'll have their full-time experience, and one's in either mild, moderate, and moderate to severe. So they stay in either mild, moderate one semester and then go to moderate to severe the other semester. So we don't have, they can do either one. It doesn't matter to us. It doesn't matter to Clovis. It's all about the right fit, the right teachers, who's available, that sort of thing. And then they come out on the other end. Also, one thing Clovis does that really helps support this is they allow their final semester students to be interns if that's available to them. And yet they still get to stay residents. Some partnerships don't allow for that, but I think it's very realistic to think that an intern who's also a resident has more support than an intern that isn't a resident, as well as money. And that can make all the difference for a lot of people to diversify the workforce, certainly. We want people who are parents. We want people who have come from other states and have other great ideas. We'd like everybody to be able to have the chance to become a teacher, in particular, a special education teacher. And then when they're first brought on in Clovis, they are required to sign up to be a substitute, which allows the smoothness of making some money that first semester, subbing for their teacher, and it just takes away all of the interior barriers for getting money to them in a way that's more direct from Clovis. So, and then the world is always shifting, and the world in California is always shifting, and the pots of money are always shifting. So being aware of where those monies are coming from and trying to predict where they might come from next and being flexible, I think is really helpful.
Yeah. So I just appreciated that insight, and I think that really helped our residents. And once we move to that shift to that summer, fall, spring, it really will help them complete it a lot quicker. It also puts them in a position where most of the hiring season is in the spring and summer for the fall. So that allows them to be finishing their program at the right time instead of in December when there's not as many opportunities for them to get hired in the district, at least for that 6 months of the end of the year. So that was a really big, that'll be a big difference for us. And I think that's really helpful. Like I mentioned earlier, the other challenge that we had was making sure that we had the right residents in our program that understood our program and having that extra layer of interview. So they actually have to interview to become a substitute also in Clovis Unified. So they have to go through that layer of interviews. And then they also have to interview with our administrator, Dr. Carter, for special education so that she can kind of vet them a little bit and just kind of talk through things with them and see what their expectations are, see if they're a good fit for us and kind of have them vet us as well. So I think having that layer is really important for districts as well to make sure that it's a good fit for your district and that this resident was someone that you would hire at the end of this, because that's the ultimate goal, is to hire these residents into our district. We're the ones that are training them and helping them navigate, and they're getting comfortable in our district, hopefully, so that they want to be a part of it. So I think that adding that is a really good thing to do from the start.
That's a really unique piece that you have a pre-admission interview for the district first, and then they go to the university. So you've really vetted them. And that's a unique. So then when they go to the university side, you collaborate with, and Kimberly, you have the professor in residence is kind of the title that gets used at Fresno State for the residency coordinators. So then there's this Clovis pre-admission interview, and then it goes over to the university side, and that's where you'll step in. And I know this is your first semester starting with Clovis, so I was just curious if you wanted to add anything onto what that process looks like and if it's different from any of the other residencies that you've worked with.
At Fresno State, it is challenging to figure out how to apply to be a teacher because there are two application portals there. And so when people are coming in cold, it's super confusing. I mean, we try to, all the time to work it and smooth that out and make it better. But the fact that they can have an immediate contact both on the university side and the school district side is extremely helpful, I think, for the student. And it's also really helpful for us to go back and forth together and say, look, I don't know the answer to this question a student asked. Do you happen to know it? And that also helps us point out where we've missed something. I think Clovis was great in stepping up and saying, we might have missed earlier interviewing, and it's not like an interview, like you're making it or you're not. It's an informational interview to make sure that they understand what they're getting into, and how special education both works and is moving forward in Clovis. So that back and forth helps both sides, I think, really support that student through the confusing and long application process that they have to go through. And we've already started now for students starting this summer. So we just keep that. They may start at one time during the year, but they interview and get information all year long.
That's fantastic. It is a hard process. There's a lot of barriers just to getting information. So it is nice as you are, growing your own, they know where to start. And you're probably doing a lot of, I know districts do a lot of the recruitment too. It's like, oh, I work with a few districts that are like, I handpick them for you. So let's get them. They have like a backdoor VIP entrance into that admission process, which is really great. Thank you for that. So last question is, I know we're getting close to time, and I do know that we have a lot of programs that are looking at potentially writing for this. So what advice would you give to programs that are just beginning to build this cross-program collaboration between, I'll do two, between the LEA and the IHE and general ed and special education within?
I just think collaboration is huge with both. And Kimberly and I have been, I think in more collaboration this year than we've ever been before with previous, with Dr. Rios was great, but I think that Kimberly has added a different element. And so I think that we communicate well and make sure that we both have the same goals in mind for all of our residents, and make sure that they're aligned, and what's going on in the classroom is what we're kind of talking about in Clovis, and what our teachers are referring to and utilizing, and same strategies, same scaffolding, all of that stuff. So I just think the collaboration and communication is just huge. We want to be on the same page. We want to talk through things like changing it from 3 semesters, starting in fall and going through fall and starting in the summer. And is that best for our residents? Is that going to be helpful? Is that going to be something that is beneficial for our residents, our teachers, the university, the district, all of those things? So yeah, kind of bouncing ideas back and forth and really talking through the positives and negatives of every idea or situation is just very key.
And I think from my point of view is recognizing that every residency looks as different as every resident does. And it's okay if not all of your residencies look the same. I think in academia, we can get a little, we know it all on ourselves, which is a problem. So if we can get out of our own way and really just accept that residents are going to look different and residencies are going to have different goals, and they're still going to change over time. And if we have something that's super important to us, then not telling someone about it, but just showing them through what we're doing that this might be an interesting way to go is better. I was looking at your Padlet when people were talking about defining special and general education roles and how very different the answers were, and they're all right. And it just reminded me of being in the residency and how different our viewpoints may be, but they're still all right. And I loved Vanessa's when she was talking, when she said that general education teachers are content experts and special education teachers are access experts. And that's just a starting point, because then the special education teachers become content experts in something else, and the general education teachers become access experts in something else, especially with the advent of artificial intelligence and how everybody's in a different place and using it in a different way. That's one of the things that I know that Marshall and I have both been talking about. I'm pretty excited about it, but I've also realized that not everybody is thinks that shiny tech objects are as fun as I do. Um, and just really accepting those things as positives as opposed to, oh no, we can't do that. Super helpful.
I love that. Thank you. And I'm just really thankful for both of you and the time that you are sharing with us and your experiences and your new learnings. And it will be wonderful to have you back in, I think we have March and April coming up. And so to see like the progression of your new partnership and the learnings along the way. So I'm really excited. So thank you both. I'd like to, before we open up for Q&A, is there anything else that you would like to share that we might not have covered on in our time together? Just want to make sure might be something, a little nugget there that you want to share with others or not.
I feel good.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm good.
Good. All right. Well, I know this webinar is we're doing chat and Q&A, and so I want to open it up for Q&A if there's folks that wanted to ask any questions specifically. I see a lot of shout outs to you all in the chat. So Tony from LA County Office of Ed, she's really appreciative of the flexibility that the LEA support to be mindful of the financial challenges and being intentional that all of this is the fit is right, and
I just want to add, Brooke, I'm sorry. I just want to make sure you didn't miss Robin Perry. It looks like she had a question in the chat that said she's interested, excuse me, in how the placements in the different contexts across the academic year, and the characteristic of a year-long placement for residencies are negotiated. Are the placements at the same school site?
They can be. A lot of the placements are at the same school site because they get comfortable at that school site, especially with the general ed teacher one semester and then the special education teacher mentor the next semester. But no, most of our residents change sites, so they kind of get a different viewpoint. Some change from an elementary to a middle school, or get a high school experience and an elementary experience, so they can kind of see the full breadth of what is out there. I think this is a good opportunity for our residents to be exposed to different programs, because they may go in thinking, I want to be an RSP teacher and that's all I want to be. Well, they might get to see a PALS class, or be in a residency, or be mentored by a PALS teacher or something like that, and all of a sudden they want to do that. So I think it's just a good opportunity for them to be able to see different sites run different way. There's different leadership at every site. There's different cultures at every site, different grade levels, different programs. All of those things are really important for them to be able to see. So I try to get them at different sites, but a lot of times, especially with the general education teacher and the special education teacher partnership, they kind of stay at that because they've got that pipeline and have that relationship already. And then the third semester, then they often go to a different site. So we try to give them options to do both.
I appreciate too that you also have them doing elementary, middle, and high school as often as possible, because when you're a special education teacher, you span to 21. So having that experience, I know that some of the people that you've put in high schools had no idea what a high school program looked like and are in love with it and never thought they would be going in.
Yeah, Bernie from Humboldt asked, can you recommend any strategies you use in Clovis that allows co-teachers to have co-planning time that the residents can see?
Oh, wow. That's a very good question. We do encourage special education teachers to be a part of PLCs at their schools, but different schools do it different ways. But I know at my school, we did that a lot. So um, I had 2 full-time RSP teachers, just for example, at my site. And so instead of doing like a K3 and a 4-6 RSP teachers, they followed their students. So they would do K2, 4, 6 one year and 1, 3, 5 the next year, or something like that. So they would stay with their families and stay with those students so that they kind of developed a relationship. So I would encourage them to be part of the professional learning community of those grade levels, so that they could kind of see what they're focused on, what the data shows them, and we're going to be focusing on for the next few weeks of teaching. So I think that's one of the ways that we collaborated with our special education teachers and our general education teachers, was to be in those meetings together. And like I said, a lot of them are all coaching together and doing things like that in collaboration. And those are where a lot of conversations happen, or is out in the field or out at recess. They all are part of supervision. So they're out at recess duty together, whatever else they're doing. So, but I think in those PLC meetings is a lot of where some of that collaboration happens. And we want everybody, all the teachers for those students, that grade level, to be a part of that conversation.
And I think we can all acknowledge that there's never enough planning time. It's a struggle.
Yep.
I appreciate that. Yeah, no, there isn't ever. So, let's see. Kate, I'm trying to look at the chat. Hosting and doing tech, and those sometimes are hard roles to like when you
No,
flip back. No. I just
I
want to make
don't
sure I'm not
see any
missing
other
anything.
questions yet. If anybody has any, you can use the Q&A feature or the chat.
Mhm. I did see Marshall Robin give you a shout out that you do a wonderful job supporting your IHE partners with prep, and Fresno Pacific appreciates you,
Well, thank you, Rob.
and that you've provided great educational experiences for her own children, and I can say for my child as well. So yeah.
It's funny when you're in a place where you have some, multiple community roles. You're a parent,
Mhm,
you're an administrator, you're a teacher over your lifespan.
mhm.
it has such benefits as well as occasional challenges. I just want to say thanks to everyone who both put this together, and Brooke for inviting us and for the participants. I think that all of us showing our willingness to share and listen. I've loved reading what's in your deep dives and listening before we got to talk. It's just really terrific. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much. I love it. And hopefully we will see your faces at the next 2 sessions. So Kate, before we wrap up, I want to just make sure that we get and hear from folks with our feedback form, of course. We love a feedback form. So we'd love to hear from you today, if possible. If you could, we have put the link in the chat, and then there's a QR code if you want to take it on the road with you. We will also follow up with an email, and we'll make sure that you have access to the feedback form. We'll make sure that the resource page and the slide deck, in case you weren't able to grab it here. And then, Kate, is there?
Yeah, I would just like to say so we created a new Zoom link because we want the next session, we want to be able to put you in breakout rooms so that you can actually dig a little bit deeper into like your specific context and the work that we're going to be presenting. So unfortunately, that means that you're going to have to re-register because I'm going to cancel this as a webinar series because we want to have that function. So in our follow-up email that's like thanking you for coming and everything, we're going to add a new registration link. So I just want to let you know that we'll make sure that we communicate that really clearly. Heather, I'm not sure if you have that available now that we could put it in the chat.
Yes, I can put the Zoom link. Absolutely.
Thank you so much. And we'll also add it, we'll like put it everywhere so you see it everywhere. I'll put it on the resources page and everything. And we'll make sure we send out reminders closer to time because the next session will be, actually, I'll put this up in March. So I know that's a while, but we will also have the recording for this session that we'll post at some point where we'll edit it a little bit. And so if you want to go back into the data or review anything or share it with anyone, you will have access to that as well. So thank you. Thank you everyone for coming.
I wish I could see everybody's faces.
I know, me too.
I know. We will in March.
We will in March, yes.
We will in March.
Looking forward to seeing you all then.
Yes.